Yo, what's going on, snipers, and welcome to a different sort of video. So with the NHL 20 alumni teams, I was gonna just do like a basic video of all team rosters and stuff like that and give you my initial impressions, but a lot of people already did that sort of thing, so I'm gonna give you guys my impressions after I looked at them and whatnot and found out who they're missing and whatnot. So basically, before we get started though, I want to say that the overalls and the potentials for all teams are kind of all over the place. Like, I don't think EA did a lot of work into this, like, at all. Because there's players like, for example, Jason Spezza is an 80 overall, and basically when he played for the Sens, he was a lot better than an 80 overall. So I don't know what they're kind of doing with the overalls, if they're trying to make the teams balanced so they kind of simulate better for franchise mode or something like that. And then also one thing I want to point out is you cannot edit the age of these franchise guys and whatnot. So if you do play a franchise mode, for example, with all alumni teams, you're going to have everybody almost retire within the first few seasons. So it's, yeah, kind of a dumb thing. I hope they kind of like fix that a bit, maybe for an upcoming update, or they decide to fix that for NHL 21, because like, I don't even think I'm going to be using these like players that they created at all. I'm just going to be making my own for my 1994 roster build. So anyways, some of the players that they're missing in this build especially is Paul Correa from the Anaheim Mighty Ducks. I don't know why he's not in the game, if it's just because he doesn't want to be or something, because I know, for example, his last name's not in the play-by-play names either, even though it was like in NHL 08 and NHL 12 and stuff like that, I think. Also, Anaheim could also add like Andy McDonald, who was a big part of their 07 Cup run. They also should have added like maybe Jonas Hiller as one of the backups. Like, I know they have Jesse Aguirre, who's really one of the, like, the best goalie in the Mighty Ducks history. And then they also have like not Jonas Hiller, what's his name, Guy Bear. Those two goalies are probably the best goalies in their history, but I think Jonas Hiller should be a goaltender on that team just because he was pretty good with them for a while, and he played with them for like, I don't know how long, like maybe 6 seasons or something before he went to Calgary. And now on to Arizona, which they don't have Shane Doan. So I don't know if it's because they don't have players that are currently like just recently retired, or players that just went overseas or something, if that's the main reason why some of these guys aren't in the build. But yeah, Shane Doan isn't on the Arizona alumni team, which is really weird. As well, they don't have Nikolai Habibulin, who was arguably the best goaltender in Arizona's history, other than like Mike Smith. So that's that. On to Boston, and now they're missing a few big pieces, including Bobby Orr. Like, why isn't Bobby Orr in the game? I have no idea. If maybe it's because of licensing or some shit, but Bobby Orr is not in the game, so that's kind of weird. They also don't have Phil Esposito, which is another big one because he was a big part of their team in like the 70s and whatnot. As well, they don't have Tiny Thompson and Frank Brimazek, who are two of their best goaltenders in their history, other than like Jerry Shevers, who's in the game and whatnot. Also, I guess you could throw in Tim Thomas isn't in the game for Boston either, so that's kind of a bummer for Bruins fans, considering Tim Thomas carried them to the Stanley Cup in 2011. Another questionable thing about Boston, though, is Glenn Murray is a 77 overall. Now, why is Glenn Murray a 77? Because this guy was like a top 6 forward in his prime, at least. And he was really good at scoring goals and whatnot, so I don't know why he's a 77, because that's like literally like a 4th line forward, and like he should be at least a top 6 in my opinion. So there's a lot of things wrong with this roster build, and I like, it kind of pisses me off that they didn't even put that much effort into it. Like, they made the players and whatnot, but they don't even have the rights to the certain jerseys from like way back in the 90s or anything, so they're kind of like halfway doing it. If they could get rights to jerseys and stuff like that from back in the day, it's going to get a lot better, like what 2K has with their alumni teams. But yeah, this is pretty rough. And then on to Buffalo, they don't have Gilbert Perreault, who's the best Buffalo Sabre in NHL history, so why is he not there? I have no idea. They also don't have Craig Ramsey, no Rick Martin, Rene Robert, or they don't even have Dominic Hasek. Why don't you have Hasek? Hasek is the best goaltender probably in NHL history. That's arguable as well, because him and Brodeur and Patrick Waugh, but Dominic Hasek should be in this. I just don't know why he's not there. It just makes no sense whatsoever. The Calgary Flames are also missing Jarome Iginla. Like Jerome McGinley is a player that recently retired like a couple years ago, so maybe it's because once again they maybe can't add players who retired within like 3 years or something like that. So yeah, Jerome McGinley is not in the game, which is dumb because he's the best Flame in NHL history. Also, they don't have Gary Suter, who's one of the best defensemen that ever played for the Flames. They don't have Mika Kiprusoff in goal, which is ridiculous because Kiprusoff is the best other than Mike Vernon in Flames history. For Carolina, they don't have Archers Urbe, who was one of the best goalies there in their history for sure. They don't also have Ron Francis, which is kind of dumb because Ron Francis being one of the highest scoring point total players in NHL history. They also don't have Jeff O'Neill, who was one that I think they could have added because he had like 400 and something points. He didn't have a long career, but like still, this guy's not been in the league since like 2007, so I don't know why they don't have him. Chicago has no Bobby Hull, but they have Dennis Hull, which makes no sense. Like they have his, I think is his brother, but they don't have Bobby Hull, and they also have Brett Hull, but they don't have Bobby for some reason. I don't know if it's just because a lot of these guys that played in like the 60s and whatnot, maybe they don't, they're part of the Hockey Hall of Fame, and maybe the Hockey Hall of Fame isn't allowing them to use it, something like that. They also don't have Doug Wilson. They don't have Jocelyn Thibault as a goaltender, which is odd because Thibault played it was one of the goaltenders that played the most games in Chicago Blackhawks history. And then on to Colorado, they don't have Peter Budaj, maybe just because he recently retired as well. They don't have Milan Hajduk, that's a big one. I don't know why they don't have Hajduk. It makes no sense either. They don't have Alex Tanguay, they don't have David Abisher, and I'm pretty sure they didn't have Adam Foote. I know they didn't on Quebec. I didn't remember if they did on Colorado, but I'm pretty sure they don't have Adam Foote either. And then on to Columbus, they have no David Vaborny, who's one of the highest point total players in Columbus Blue Jackets history. They don't have Rick Nash, because I think it's also because he recently retired like a year ago, but like still, no Rick Nash on the Columbus team is weird. They have like Ryan Johansson though for some reason, and has an 88 overall, which is just as good as like a Pat LaFontaine, so it just makes no sense with that sort of thing. They also have no Nikolai Zherdev. It could be because I think he's still playing in the KHL. Maybe that's the main reason they can't have him in. They also don't have Mark Denis or Ron Tugnan or Pascal Leclerc. So they went with like the worst goalies possible for Columbus. I just don't know why they went with them. And they didn't decide to go with Mark Denis, Ron Tugnan, or Pascal Leclerc. Like they even gave one, I think, to Matthew Guérin. And I think he was there for like maybe a season. So just kind of like stupid little things like that kind of bug me a bit. Then on to the Dallas Stars. One thing that I think is really questionable is Brett Hull is better than Mike Modano. Now, both of them are really similar players, but I would still say Mike Modano is better than Brett Hull. Like, Brett Hull was more of a pure goal scorer, but I think Mike Modano was the better player, in my opinion. But I guess it's doesn't really matter that much because it's like a 91 to a 92 difference. So that's just my opinion. Also, Dallas's team has no Brendan Morrow, which is kind of stupid because Brendan Morrow was like the captain for a few years after Modano left, I think, or I don't even remember what the case was, but Brendan Morrow was the captain for a few years, and yeah, he was a pretty big player for them. Also, they don't have Sergei Zubov, which is kind of dumb because he just recently got inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. They don't have Neil Broughton, who was one of the best Dallas Stars of all time. They also have no Dave Gagne, who played a long time with Minnesota, like the North Stars, and in Dallas. Now on to Detroit. They have a really stacked team, but they are missing some big players, like Sergei Fedorov's not there, Chris Osgood's not there, Dominik Hasek, who I previously mentioned, is not there. And same with Manny Legacy. Like, Manny Legacy could have been a goaltender there as well, but they didn't have him for some reason. I don't know if they're trying to still balance out these teams or what, but yeah, they didn't have any of those good players there. And one thing I don't like about Detroit is Datsuk's kind of underrated because they have him as an 89, while in my opinion, he could be more of like a 92-ish player because he was a very good defensive player, really good like deking and all that sort of thing, really good at scoring. Just, I don't know why they don't have him a little bit higher than that. Like, 89 is not that bad, but 92 would probably serve him better, or 91 at least. Now, for the Edmonton Oilers, there's a couple big ones that aren't there, including Tommy Salo. Tommy Salo also was one of the goaltenders that played a lot in Edmonton, and I don't know why he's not in the game. They also don't have Ryan Smith. Like, how do you not have Ryan Smith? Is it also because he retired like 3 years ago or 4 years ago it was? Just it's weird that they don't have Ryan Smith, because he's like, in my opinion at least, when I look back at my childhood with the Oilers and whatnot, I see Ryan Smith first before anybody on that team. So there's also like Doug Waite, who played a long time at Edmonton, Sean Horkov, who also I see a lot of when I think of Edmonton from like back in 06. You also see Jason Smith, who's not there. And then you go into Florida. Now, Florida has a really odd thing because they have Igor Larionov, and it's like, why would you put Igor Larionov on Florida? He only played 26 career games with Florida. Like, he played mostly with Detroit and San Jose, so, like, both of them, I think, have him as well, but why would you put him on the Florida team as well? That's, like, taking up a spot of another created guy you could put in instead. It's kind of dumb that they're throwing in somebody like Larionov on Florida. It's just basically they're too lazy to, like, add another player or some shit. And then also another one that's odd with Florida is that they have Mike Vernon on Florida. And Mike Vernon, I didn't even realize played for Florida, but he played only 34 games there in like the 99-2000 season, I think it was, before he went to San Jose. So I don't know why he's even on Florida as well. It's just kind of laziness to an extent. They also don't have Stephen Weiss on that team, Nathan Horton, Victor Kozlov, Robert Svala, Thomas Vokoun, and a big one here in John Van Beesbroek. Why don't you have Van Beesbroek in that? Like, this guy was like the main reason the Florida Panthers went to the Stanley Cup Finals in 1996, and he's not on the team. It's kind of weird. And then you decide to put Mike Vernon as the starter, who only played like less than a season there, so that just makes no sense. Then for Hartford, there is a bit of an error that they made, which they did put the wrong image for Mike Lewitt. They put like I think it was a Toronto Maple Leafs defenseman or forward. I just don't know who it is in the image, but they did put the wrong image for him. I think they did that with some other players in like the normal roster. Like I think Joseph Gambardella from the Oilers has like Jason Garrison's face is what I saw. So yeah, Hartford also doesn't have Ron Francis, like I mentioned earlier. They don't have Kevin Dineen, Pat Verbeek, Jeff Sanderson. Like, a lot of these guys are big players for their like teams and whatnot, but they're just not in the game. Like, I don't know if it's because they don't want to be in the game or what it is, but it's just, it bugs me a lot. Then for the Los Angeles Kings, they don't have Butch Goring, who kind of played a lot of games there, and he was pretty like. He was kind of like one of the faces of the team in the earlier, like, I think it was in the 70s with his, like, weird-ass helmet and whatnot. I think he should have been on this team just because he's kind of well-known to an extent. They also could have had Matthias Nordstrom because he played a lot of games there. Jamie Storr, Felix Potvin, who had a short stint there. They could have also added, like, Ziggy Palffy, but they didn't. Now onto the Minnesota North Stars. They don't have a few goaltenders and some big players, so they don't have John Casey or Don Beaupre, who those guys should be on the team because they played a lot of games with the North Stars. They also don't have, like I said, Neil Broughton with Dallas. They don't have him in Minnesota either. They don't have Dino Ciccarelli, which is kind of dumb as well because Dino Ciccarelli was a really good player for the North Stars. And they don't have Dave Gagne, who I mentioned also for Dallas. Now, Minnesota also has like some really weird players on their team. So the first one is Christoph Brander, who only played 35 NHL games with the Wild and never played in the NHL again. So they're just throwing him in there because they don't know who else to add, or they're probably just trying to go with like lines. Maybe they want to have a fourth liner and he's a good fourth liner or like a depth forward, but still, like, just throwing Christoph Brander there is kind of dumb to an extent. Like, there's a lot of big name players on this team as well that they didn't throw on, so I just don't know why Brander's taking a spot up. They also have Zach Bierk as their backup. Like, Zach Bierk, of all people, like, I never thought I would see this guy in an NHL game again, but he only played one game with the Minnesota Wild, and he played a couple games with Phoenix as well, but he never played a long time in the NHL at all. Yet you're just adding him to the game because you don't have any other player to put in. But you should have put in somebody like maybe Nicholas Backstrom, who just retired, I think, in real life, but he was a goaltender in Finland for quite a long time. And then also there's like no Marian Gaborik on this team, maybe because he's still under contract with the Sens technically. There's also no Pierre-Marc Bouchard. There's no Andrew Burnett, no Manny Fernandez, or Josh Harding. So there's a lot of big players that each team is missing, it seems like. and I don't know if it's due to rights or what it is. Now the Montreal Canadiens, they have since they have like a really deep history, it's kind of hard for them to add all of them, I guess. But there is some big pieces that they're missing, like Ken Dryden, George Hainsworth, Bill Durnan for goaltenders. And then for forwards, they're missing Maurice Richard. I don't know if it's because like maybe his family doesn't want him in the game because he passed away in like 2000, I think it was, or the late 90s. But yeah, they don't have Maurice Richard or Henry the Pocket Rocket Richard. They don't also have Jacques Lemaire, and they don't have Saku Koivu. Like, I don't know why they don't have Saku Koivu, if it's also because he retired like not too long ago. But it still just bugs me that Koivu is not there, because Koivu, once again, is the player I look to when I see Montreal in the 2000s at least. Now onto the Nashville Predators. They don't have Dan Hamhuis, which I guess I get because I think he still actually plays with Nashville in real life, or he is a free agent or something like that. But Dan Hamhuis is definitely still a player I see as a Nashville Predator that should be on this team. They also should have had like David Legwand, Martin Erat, Kimmo Timonen, Steve Sullivan, Thomas Vokoun, and Mike Dunham. I just don't know why any of those players are not on this team. A lot of them played a long time with Nashville, but they're just not in this. Now, New Jersey, this is a very big one. I don't know why they don't have him in the game, but they don't have Martin Brodeur. Like, if you're going to make an alumni team, Martin Brodeur is like one of the first players you're going to add, but they don't add Martin Brodeur. Like, once again, it could be because he retired somewhat recently, but it just makes no sense. Like, they have, I forget, like Chris Terreri and whatnot, but they don't have Martin Brodeur. Just makes no sense considering he was there for like 20 seasons or something like that. They also don't have Patrick Elias, which is another guy that kind of recently retired like a few years back. They also don't have Kirk Muller. Now on the Islanders, they also have like one big guy that is Mike Bossy, not in this. I don't know if it's also because maybe they just don't have like certain rights to older guys, but like Mike Bossy should be one of those guys you add as well, at like one of the first players you add, because he was a really good player and he was synonymous for, I think that's a word, synonymous, I don't know, but with the Islanders in like the 80s when they won their cups and whatnot. Also, Rick DiPietro played one of the most games as a goaltender in the Islanders organization, and they also could have had Tommy Salo, who I mentioned with the Oilers. They could have had him there as well. Now, the Rangers, there's not a lot really, but they could have added like Gump Worsley and also John Van Beesbrook, because he did play there before he played in Florida. Now, the Ottawa Senators, I'm going to have a lot of players that I think should have been on this team just because I'm a Sens fan. But Spezza should not be an 80 overall. As I was mentioning at the beginning of the video, why is Spezza an 80? Like, I know he is probably in real life right now, but when he was playing with the Sens, this guy was playing like a 92 overall or so. Because like him, Spezza, and Heatley, or not him, Spezza and Heatley, him, Alfredson and Heatley, the three of those guys were insane. Like, I just don't get why Spezza is that low. If like you're trying to replicate when they played for that team, it would have been a lot better than just throwing overalls from what they currently would be like. So it makes no sense. Also, it's kind of weird because they have Darren Medeli as the backup, who's actually going to be in my 1994 roster build. But this guy only played 39 career games and he had only 4 wins. And you're going to throw him in as a backup. Like, out of any single Sens goaltender, you put him in. Like, they could have put in Patrick Lalime, Ray Emery. Like, just guys like that. Even Craig Anderson should have been there instead of Mike Condon. Like, I just don't get it. Then there's also for forwards, they could have added, like, Daniel Alfredson's not in it for some reason. Danny Heatley's not in it. Mike Fisher. They could have added Alexei Yashin, Marian Hossa, Radek Bonk, all those type of guys, but they didn't add them. So I'm just kind of confused with their thought process into making these teams. Now onto the Philadelphia Flyers, there's a couple big pieces, including the big 3 guys that play with them during like the 90s and some in the 2000s. So like Eric Lindros should be in this, John LeClaire, Mark Recchi. And then goaltending wise, I think they should have put in Roman Cechmanek because he was a very good goaltender. And then Brian Boucher maybe just as an extra, because Brian Boucher played with the Flyers, I think, on like 2 different stints, and he was pretty serviceable with them. Now the Pittsburgh Penguins, they're not missing a whole lot really, but they should have had like Ron Francis again. He should have been there because he was there with both their cup winning teams in the 90s, I think. They should have also added Jean Provenance, who I think was their first ever captain in NHL history. They also should have had Kevin Stevens, who scored a lot of goals with them, Sil Apps, and Rick Kehoe. And then goaltending, I'm kind of confused on why they didn't add these guys for goaltending, but they didn't have Tom Barrasso or Ken Riggets, so it was a little confusing why they didn't add those guys. And then for Quebec, there's not really that much of a change I would make with them. I would definitely make Peter Stastny better overall, though, because Peter Stastny is highly underrated. Like, the guy was over point per game. Also, Dale Hunter's not on this team, even though Dale Hunter had, like, a stint. Like, I think he started his career in Quebec, went to Washington, then went back to Colorado, like, later in his career, but he still should have been on this team, at least. Now, for San Jose, Jeff Friesen's not on this team, Jonathan Cheechoo's not on this team, Vincent Damphousse, Arturs Urbe, who I mentioned with Carolina, and Steve Shields is not on this team, so those are guys I would add for sure, because, like, Cheechoo had 56 goals in 06, like, this guy was definitely a player I remember, like, highly in 2006 and whatnot with, like, the San Jose Sharks. Another thing I would change with the Sharks, though, is Nabokov is a bit too low, in my opinion. Like, Nabokov was the best goaltender in San Jose Sharks history, yet he's only like an 85 overall, which is only 1 point higher than Vesa Toskala. Like, why are you going to give Vesa Toskala an 84 and Nabokov an 85? I don't see a correlation there at all, because in my opinion, Toskala is more of like an 81, 82-ish for a backup, maybe even less than that, because he did have some shitty seasons, but it just makes no sense. Then for St. Louis, it's kind of weird that they would throw Gretzky on this team. I know Gretzky's like the best player of all time, arguably, but putting him on St. Louis is kind of dumb because he like only played 18 games there. Like, you're just taking up another spot for a St. Louis Blues player. Like, you could have thrown in Pavel Demitra instead, or somebody like Brian Sutter. It just makes no sense why you would throw Gretzky on that team, just even though he did play there. Like, 18 games is nothing. Like, it should be a team of players that played at least, like, maybe 100 games on that team or some shit like that. Then for Tampa Bay, they don't have Vincent Lecavalier. Once again, could be due to recent retirements. I have no idea. They also don't have Pavel Kabina, Nikolai Hebibulin, Brad Richards, Vincent Prospel, and Darren Pupa. Like, Darren Pupa played the most games as a goaltender with the Tampa Bay organization. Hebibulin won the cup in 04 for them. Kubina was a really good defenseman for them when they won the cup as well. Brad Richards, also a very synonymous player with Tampa Bay in the earlier 2000s. Vinny Prospel was there for a short bit, but he still should be there. And then on to Toronto. They're missing like a couple pieces, like big name, like older guys. They don't have Felix Potvin, like I was mentioning with the Los Angeles Kings. Felix Potvin should be there because he was one of the more well-known goaltenders for Toronto in the 90s. They also don't have Mike Palmateer, Dave Keon, George Armstrong, Tim Horton, Ron Ellis, and then they also don't have Thomas Caberlet. Once again, recent retirements maybe, but still Thomas Caberlet should be there. For Vancouver, they don't have the Sedin twins. Once again, could be recent retirements. They don't have Stan Smill, which is kind of weird. They don't have Pavel Bure, which I don't really get. Because, like, they have Pavel Bure and Hutt and stuff like that, but they can't put him in an offline mode. It just makes no sense. Like, their highest rated player was, like, an 87, I think, which was Naslund. But they don't have Pavel Bure, who should be on there, and, like, a 92, because he's the main reason the Canucks got, like, probably as far as they did in 94. Maybe also Kirk McLean, but still. They also could have had like Thomas Grenadine, Todd Bertuzzi, Dan Cloutier, and even Roberto Luongo. I know he just recently retired, but he still should be on the Vancouver team because he was a big piece of that team in 2011. Then for Washington, they should have had Olaf Kolzig, obviously the best goaltender that I know of in Washington's history, but they don't have him, and they had like Ron Lowe or something like that, who was, I think, part of the inaugural Washington Capitals team. They also should have had Don Beaupre. Peter Bondra is not in the game. If you're gonna have a Washington team, you gotta have Peter Bondra. Just makes no sense. Dale Hunter as well, Mike Ridley, and Calle Johansson. And then finally, the Winnipeg Jets team doesn't have Nikolai Hebibulin or Bob Essenza, who are two goaltenders who were kind of well known with Winnipeg in the earlier 90s and whatnot. Early to mid 90s. So yeah, anyways guys, that is my list of players that should be in the game that are not in the game on the alumni teams. I like the alumni teams to an extent because there is players, like I said, that I never thought I would see in a game again. Like, example, Dmitry Mironov with the Mighty Ducks team. Like, I never thought I would see that guy in a game again, but he's in the game. It's kind of cool to see that, but, like, when you don't have a lot of the big name players on your, like basically on all-time teams, it's like these are kind of just like half-assed, and a lot of the players are on multiple teams. Like, you have like Mike Sillinger on 12 different teams. You're just basically doing that because you don't have the time to actually put out a full team of 18 players. You just want to get rid of that roster spot. Like, you just want to give it to Mike Sillinger instead of throwing in somebody else. It's kind of annoying, but at least it's in the game, and there's some chance for them maybe to do some tweaks going into 21, or maybe they'll do some updates down the road. So anyways, that's my opinions on those rosters. Let me know what you guys think about them down below. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.